So that brings us to the end of this module on Sass fundamentals. In this module, we started off by learning about Sass variables and how we can define a Sass variable by prefixing it with the $sign. We then give the variable a name, followed by a colon, and the value that we want to assign to it. And we saw how we can assign colors and pixel values, for example. We saw that once we're using these variables in our CSS property values, that we can simply go and change the variable value at the top of the file, and it will automatically replace all of the instances of the variable when we next generate the CSS. So in this way, Sass variables help us to reduce the overall maintenance costs for our CSS. Next, we learned about mixins and how we can define a mixin using the @mixin syntax, how we then give a name to our mixin, and how we can optionally allow mixins to accept parameters when we call them. Inside our mixin, we have a number of CSS properties and values, and then we can include this mixin in our other styles by using the @include directive. And we saw one possible use of mixins to automatically apply vendor prefixes to something like border radius. We learned about nested rules and how we can mimic the HTML structure inside our Sass selectors, and how this can lead to improved readability when we're trying to work out what styles apply to which HTML elements. But we also learned that we shouldn't overdo this, and how 3 or 4 levels of nesting is usually a good maximum to stick to. Next, we learned how we can split our Sass across multiple Sass files, and if we name our Sass file starting with an underscore, how we won't get any CSS generated from this file. We then learned how we can use the @import directive to import all of the content from one Sass file into another. And we learned that this happens at design time, so we don't have to go and alter our HTML to make multiple HTTP requests for our CSS. We learned about inheritance and how we can use the @extend directive to inherit all of the CSS properties from another selector. And we saw an example of how by doing this we can simplify the number of classes that we need to apply in our HTML, for example going from 2 classes button yes to a single yes class. We saw the 2 different styles of comments when we're using Sass, the single line comment style for creating internal comments that don't get output to the resulting CSS, and the multi-line style comments which do get output to the resulting CSS. Finally, we looked at what happens when we get errors compiling our Sass files, and how we can emit our own debug and warning messages using the @debug and @warn directives. Join me in the next module when we'll look at some more advanced Sass.